5,000 soldiers for one man. That was the final exchange. 5,000 Egyptian prisoners of war for a single Israeli operative who had spent 4 years drinking champagne with the men building missiles aimed at Tel Aviv. The price tells you everything about what that one man had been worth. This is the story of the Champagne spy. The platform is crowded, but the man boarding the train doesn't belong to it. He belongs to no city now. In 1960, Wolfgang Lotz stepped onto the first of many trains crossing Europe, and he did not look back. Not because he wasn't careful, because careful meant never looking like you were being careful at all. This wasn't tourism, it was erasure. Every city he passed through, every ferry he boarded, every connection he doubled back on served a single purpose: to shake anyone who might be watching. A surveillance detection route stretched across an entire continent, designed to confuse every intelligence service that could conceivably have eyes on him. He watched for the same face appearing twice, the same coat on a different platform, the same newspaper folded the same way in a different cafe 3 countries apart. Each leg of the journey was calculated, each detour deliberate. Lotz was running a ghost protocol before the term existed, turning himself into a man with no discernible pattern and no traceable destination. The Cold War had turned Europe into a chessboard where every square was watched. West Germany in particular had become a fertile center for espionage, with former wartime scientists, recycled intelligence operatives, and competing agencies all circling each other in the same cities. Mossad understood this environment intimately. They knew that launching a deep cover operative into a hostile target country meant first guaranteeing he arrived clean. One trailing officer from a third-party service, one photograph logged in the wrong file, and the entire operation would be dead before it started. So Lotz kept moving. Days became weeks. Trains gave way to ferries, ferries to planes, planes back to trains. He was not merely traveling. He was proving, mile by mile, that no one had followed him from his point of origin to his final destination. That destination was Paris. In a quiet briefing, Mossad handed him a mission with 2 edges. First, locate Egypt's secret missile factories. Second, monitor the 26 West German scientists who had been recruited to build them. General Mahmoud Khalil, former head of Egyptian Air Force intelligence and a close confidant of NASA, had assembled this team personally, drawing on expertise that echoed the wartime rocket programs both superpowers had already harvested. The program was real, it was advancing, and Israel needed someone inside. Lotz had something no fabricated legend could provide. He was German, born German, culturally, linguistically, instinctively German. His identity wasn't a cover story stitched together by analysts in Tel Aviv. It was organic, and it would hold under the kind of scrutiny that breaks most operatives within weeks. Mossad recognized this advantage and built the entire operation around it. The champagne and the parties were still ahead. The friendships cultivated over expensive dinners, the trust earned in Cairo's expatriate circles, the secrets exposed through patience and proximity. All of that waited on the other side of this moment. But the mission began here, in the cold discipline of a man who had just spent weeks erasing his own footprints across a continent. He arrived in Paris clean, unseen, and fully briefed. The mission waiting for him in Cairo was more dangerous than any surveillance team he'd just spent weeks shaking, because the people he was about to deceive were building weapons designed to erase his country from the map. Mossad had already begun to understand the scale of what Egypt was constructing, and the intelligence picture was alarming. It had a name attached to it. General Mahmoud Khalil had succeeded in recruiting 26 West German scientists for a secret missile program. This wasn't rumor. It wasn't speculation. It was confirmed. and the names on the recruitment list told Mossad exactly how serious Egypt's ambitions were. Among those scientists was Dr. Eugen Senger of the Institute of Research on Jet Propulsion in Stuttgart. Senger wasn't some obscure academic. He was a propulsion specialist whose expertise placed him in the same lineage as the men who had built the V-2 rockets during the Second World War, the same class of expertise that the United States and the Soviet Union had spent years fighting over, recruiting and hoarding. Now Egypt had access to it. 26 men, carefully selected with the knowledge to design and build weapons that could reach Israeli cities. This program was not improvised. It was architected. General Khalil hadn't simply gathered a collection of willing engineers. He had built a pipeline. The Cold War division of Germany had created a fertile environment where scientific expertise flowed to whoever could pay for it. Veterans of wartime weapons programs, men whose skills were forged under the Third Reich, now existed in a post-war landscape where loyalties were negotiable and paychecks came from whoever wrote them first. Egypt was writing them. And the divided, chaotic intelligence landscape of Cold War Germany meant that almost no one was watching closely enough to stop it. Israel understood immediately that this was not a distant or theoretical threat. This was a program being built by men who had the precise knowledge to make it work. Rocket propulsion, guidance systems, warhead design. The expertise existed, the funding existed, and the political will in Cairo was absolute. Nasser wanted a deterrent that could hold Israel at gunpoint, and he was assembling the team to deliver it. What Mossad needed now was a man inside Cairo who could fill in everything the satellite images and informants couldn't reach. That man was already on his way. In 1961, Wolfgang Lotz walked into Cairo carrying nothing more suspicious than a German accent and a taste for good champagne. He settled into the city with the ease of a man who genuinely belonged there. Because in one sense, he did. Lotz wasn't pretending to be German. He was German. Born in Germany, raised in its culture, fluent in every idiom and social reflex that marks a man as authentic. This wasn't a fabricated legend stitched together by Mossad handlers. It was biography, weaponized. And it gave him something no amount of training could manufacture: the ability to walk into Cairo's small German expatriate community and be accepted without a single question. That community was exactly where he needed to be. The 26 scientists recruited by General Khalil didn't live in isolation. They socialized. They attended dinners, receptions, and gatherings hosted by the city's European residents. They drank, they talked, and Wolfgang Lotz made certain he was always nearby when they did. His technique was visibility itself. Where most spies retreat into shadows, Lotz stepped into the light. He cultivated a lavish lifestyle. The champagne, the parties, the expensive tastes of a man who appeared to have money and no particular reason to hide it. This wasn't recklessness. It was a deliberate intelligence technique. Conspicuous wealth opens doors in any society, and in Cairo's elite circles, it opened exactly the right ones. Military officials, government figures, and the German scientists building Egypt's secret missile program all moved through the same social world Lotz now inhabited. He listened carefully at every gathering. Dr. Eugen Senger was among those recruited scientists, as were 25 others, specialists whose expertise in rocketry and propulsion made them invaluable to Egypt's ambitions. They discussed their work in ways they never would have with a stranger. But Lotz wasn't a stranger. He was a fellow German, a friend, a man who poured generously and asked the right questions at the right moments. By the end of 1962, he had established the full extent of Egypt's missile-building program, the factory locations, the technical capabilities, the personnel involved, and something Mossad hadn't fully mapped from the outside, a front company called Intra-Handel, funneling guidance components for ballistic missiles into Egypt's factories under legitimate business cover. Khalil hadn't just recruited the scientists. He had hidden an entire weapons pipeline inside the routine commerce of post-war Europe. Every detail was transmitted back to Tel Aviv through covert communications channels maintained across his years undercover in one of the most hostile intelligence environments on Earth. Mossad now had what it needed, a complete picture of the threat, delivered by a man who had earned his nickname one glass at a time. The Champagne spy had exposed Egypt's secret from the inside. For 4 years, Lotz moved through Cairo's elite circles, drinking with the men building weapons aimed at Israel, transmitting their secrets and never breaking cover. But Egyptian counterintelligence was not standing still. And in 1965, the clock finally ran out. 4 years. For 4 years, Wolfgang Lotz had moved through Cairo without a single slip that mattered. He had mapped missile factories, identified procurement networks stretching back to West Germany, tracked the movements and work of 26 West German scientists, and transmitted it all to Tel Aviv. He had done everything Mossad had asked of him in that quiet Paris briefing, and more. The operation was, by any reasonable measure, one of the most productive deep-cover missions in Israeli intelligence history, and then Egyptian counterintelligence ended it. The details of his capture remain sparse in the declassified record. What matters is the outcome. The man who had raised champagne glasses with generals and scientists, who had exposed Egypt's secret missile program from the inside, was now sitting in an Egyptian prison cell. The cover that had seemed so natural, so organic, built on the bedrock of his actual German birth, was gone. The social connections, the parties, the expatriate community that had given him access to everything, all of it dissolved the moment the Egyptians put him in handcuffs. His capture was a cold reminder. Even the most successful operations have finite lifespans. Egyptian intelligence had not been as blind as Lotz's unbroken 4-year run might have suggested. Somewhere, something had triggered suspicion. Somewhere, the careful architecture of his legend had developed a crack wide enough for counterintelligence to exploit. No cover lasts forever. Lotz had always known this. Every deep cover operative knows it. But knowing it and living it are different things entirely. Now his fate belonged to forces he couldn't influence from a cell. There was no extraction plan. Mossad didn't have a team standing by to break him out of an Egyptian prison. Once you're caught in hostile territory, you wait. You survive if you can. And the stakes of that waiting were not abstract. Survival was never guaranteed. Release was never promised. Lotz had no way of knowing whether he'd leave that prison alive. The months became years. Lotz sat in Egyptian custody through 1965, through 1966, into 1967. The intelligence he had gathered continued to shape Israeli strategic planning, but the man who had gathered it had no role left to play. He was a spent asset, valuable only in what he had already delivered and in whatever exchange value his captors might one day recognize. Everything now depended on something changing the geopolitical equation dramatically enough to give Israel the leverage to bring him home. Then came June 1967. 6 days of war that changed the Middle East entirely. In 6 days, Israel dismantled the Egyptian Air Force on the ground, swept through the Sinai Peninsula, seized the Golan Heights, and took East Jerusalem. The military victory was so overwhelming, so total, that it fundamentally rewrote the power dynamics of the entire region overnight. Egypt lost thousands of soldiers as prisoners of war. Israel, for the first time, held leverage it had never possessed before. And somewhere inside that leverage was a man named Lotz. The negotiations that followed were quiet, careful, and ruthless. Israel wanted its people back, every single one. Lotz and 8 other captured Israeli operatives were on the list. Egypt wanted its soldiers back, thousands of them. The final exchange was staggering in its scale. Wolfgang Lotz and the other captured Israeli agents came home in exchange for 5,000 Egyptian prisoners of war, 5,000 soldiers for one Champagne spy. It was, by any measure, a remarkable accounting of what 4 years inside Egypt's secret missile program had been worth. Lotz had walked into Cairo carrying a German accent and a bottle of champagne. He had left it in handcuffs. His wife, Waltraud, who had shared his cover and been arrested beside him, endured the same years in an Egyptian cell and walked free beside him when the exchange was made. And he had come home because the intelligence he gathered, the missile factories he located, the scientists he identified, and the supply chains he traced had helped shape the strategic decisions that won Israel the war that finally set him free.